Liz, how are you?
So good. Kelsey, how are you?
Good. Thanks for being on the Hey Yo with Kelsey Moore podcast.
Oh my gosh, what an honor. I can't believe I'm here.
Oh my gosh, what an honor. Are you kidding me? I was on your podcast. That's an honor.
Twice, two of my favorite episodes we've ever done. And honestly, we need like series 3, 4, 5, 6. Like, we just need to keep like coming back
We
to
do. That's
Kelsey.
why I invited you on mine.
Yes, yes, we do. We have so many things to talk about.
I know, and I'm really excited about today's conversation, exercise with kids. Um, I see obviously your Instagram like stories all the time. You're one of my favorite people to follow. And what I've seen in you, especially since our first podcast recording together, I have seen you share more and more about your personal exercise journey and how you're sharing that with your three daughters.
Mhm.
Obviously, Joey, likes to run. So we've had conversations about that. But Liz, you did a 75 hard, which is super freaking hard.
Yeah.
Um, and I would love for you to start off the podcast just talking about your personal background with exercise and how that's changed over the years and how you would like to implement that in your motherhood journey.
Yeah. I would say for a long time, maybe 5 or 6 years, I was very on and off with exercise, just kind of joining in on what other people were doing. So I would see someone running and I'd be like, oh, I'll go for a run. Found out I was like, quote, terrible at it, right? Terrible, like that was deconditioned, as Kelsey would say. So got really discouraged there, was like, running's not for me. Then I would see someone doing like CrossFit or doing classes and I would kind of join in there. And I just never really found my groove. And then I would say I was getting more inspired as some of our siblings moved onto the street and they are really big fitness gurus. And so I was learning a lot from them. And just being in community with other people who work out a lot, you're just naturally like, oh, yeah, I could do like a third lift this week. Like, that's not a crazy thing to think about.
Mhm.
So I started exercising a lot more when they moved on the street, which is actually a huge blessing. We both built out kind of gyms in our house, so we'd have everything right here. And then I decided to do 75 hard. And I feel like that was the pivotal moment of me saying, like, okay, I've been kind of dabbling in my fitness journey, but I've never tried to push myself so hard that I really stuck to something long term and was forced to find something I actually could tolerate to every single day. So that's what I did. I did 75 hard. I did it in a season where I was very well rested. I wasn't like postpartum. I wasn't planning a pregnancy anytime soon. Like, I just felt like all the things in my life gave enough space for me to focus on something as intense as 75 hard. And I just put that little caveat because I think sometimes people get nervous about purposefully stressing your body out for 75 days. But I would say there's ways to do it functionally, and there's also good that comes from some of that stress. So I did 75 hard. My girls watched me strength train. In that process, about 2 weeks in, my brother was like, hey, I have this Peloton app. Like, do you want to profile on it? And I was like, sure. Are they like 45-minute timed workouts? Because like I have to be specific in my timing. And he's like, oh, yeah, you can search a library. I was like, sweet. That's what I need. I need some guidance to keep
Mhm.
me going because I was doing like one walk a day, one strength train, and started doing that. And I was like, oh, I love this. I love that I feel like I'm learning. I feel like I am getting a grasp on things. And wow, I was using higher weights as the weeks progressed. And seeing yourself be able to do the same movement with higher reps and more weight was like, oh, I am building muscle. Like the scale hasn't budged, but I'm building muscle. Like I'm building strength. And within that, my girls watched me do the whole thing. And then that kind of kicked off this conversation of like, well, what could they do? Like what
Mhm.
could their fitness journey look like? And so since then, it's really evolved, and I can share more about that as we continue. But I feel like the 75 hard last fall was a great and this is what we did too. Is I sat my kids down. We're big on family meetings, and I sat my kids down. I said, listen, mom's going to do something hard for the next 75 days. It's going to get really old really fast, and it's going to require you guys to kind of pick up some of my slack. Like, I'm not going to be making home cooked dinners every single night, and I just need you all on board because I want to do this thing, and you're going to see me working out. You're going to see me like out on a walk. There's going to be times where you guys need to be self-sufficient. And funny enough, I've had the same family meeting now where I'm like, listen, mom's going to have a baby, And let's revert back to our 75 hard protocol. Okay, we all know what it's like when mom's offline for a little bit. And now I have context for that, which is great. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And then how have you brought exercise through your pregnancy?
so for the first trimester, I walked. That was my
Mhm.
like, yes, let's get a little walk in. And then around 10-ish weeks, I started strength training back up again. And I would say I was doing just a little bit lighter, not for any like worry or scare in pregnancy, but just physically, I was just exhausted. I don't feel like I was eating enough, just because I had really low appetite. So I started strength training again. And, I did have several conversations with the girls. They're like, is that healthy? Like, are you sure you can do that? Can you squat like that? I'm like, yeah, this is actually really good for the baby. Like, this is really healthy. I'm following a prenatal protocol. Like,
Love
I'm
it.
doing this like intentionally. Yeah. Um, and since then, we have done little things. So we have pushed each of our kids in their own way to pursue their own kind of challenges. But another thing we've done is Joey, my husband, and my oldest daughter, Sophie, are planning to run a 10K together. And so she is training for a 10K. And she's just like me. She hates running. She feels very deconditioned. She's very out of breath. And for the last, I would say, 8-9 weeks, she has put in a weekly run. She's just training like once a week right now. But she started out just like doing 1 mile and then 1.5 and then 2 and 2.5. And she's gotten up to, I think, about 4.5 miles. And now she's kind of working on her pace a little bit more. So yeah, we've continued the conversation post 75 hard and into pregnancy, where they're
Mhm.
still seeing me do things like strength train, walk, and move about. And it's when they're homeschooled and they're home with you all day, it's just kind of naturally coming up. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think that's what everyone kind of sees you doing. Obviously, Instagram is just something that you choose to share, but you're definitely showing how you're integrating that in a very natural way with your daughters. And you're showing how you're doing exercise with them as you're being an example, but you're also doing it in an age appropriate way. So, can you give us just a snippet of how you're doing that with also your two younger ones and how you're challenging them?
Yeah. So after I finished 75 hard, I think I was on like day 70 maybe. So I had 5 days left, and was sitting on the couch with Ruth, who at the time was 7, and I was like, aren't you so proud of your mom? Like, I've done this hard thing. And she was like, honestly, I feel like I could do it. So I was like, oh, I love your confidence. Okay, great. I said, well, why don't you do your own version? Like, let's do like 30 days. And so it became like Ruthie's 30 hard. And I said, let's pick, 5 or 6 things that you want to do to incorporate it. And just like 75 hard, they were spanning a multitude of facets in your life. It wasn't just exercise or just diet.
Mhm.
It was like, we wanted her reading to improve. So we did like 20 minutes of reading a day. And then it was like, well, I wanted her to spend time outside, but it was like late fall, early winter. And I was like, you should do 20 minutes a day outside, like even when it's gross out. And there were times where she would just have to sit on the porch in the dark with the porch light on because she hadn't had her 20 minutes yet. And she was like, I'm freezing out here. And I'd watch my older daughter go sit on the porch with a blanket with her, because I was like, yeah, that's sacrifice, man. You came up with these rules. And we really let her lead it and kind of gave her parameters. So she did this 30 hard situation and she crushed it. And we told her, we said, listen, you miss a day, you start over. It's how it is. And she didn't miss a day. She crushed it. We did it again, I think in like January the following year, which would have been early this year. Again, crushed it. Did a slightly different set of parameters, but along the same lines. And then now she's in her third 30 hard. She's on day 11. And the physical component is 10 minutes of exercise a day. And for me right now, because she is going through a lot of growth, but also we're really trying to work on her feet and her mobility. She's lacking with some ankle flexibility. I really want those 10 minutes to just be intentional. Like, if you just stretch your feet for 10 minutes, that's good. If you, like yesterday, she's like, would you like to go on a walk with me? I was like, yeah, let's get your 10 minutes in. Let's go for a walk. Doesn't have to be rigorous. I will tell you a fascinating case study. I don't know how you would categorize this, but it was like day 1, I believe. And she was like, let me just look up like a YouTube kids workout thing for 10 minutes. And there's actually some great little channels out there. And she turned it on and was in the living room which is like on our first floor, like everyone can see in the house. And my older daughter criticized the way that she was doing a squat. And she's like, you're not doing it right. And Ruthie just immediately lost it and was so discouraged. And I had to have a really hard conversation with my older daughter and be like, listen, you do not speak about her physical performance in that way because you don't understand how that's impacting her confidence.
Yeah.
I understand you were trying to coach her in that moment, but that's not how she took it. And it was really evident to see the connection between how she was feeling about her body. And it's just like doing this challenge on its own is always like, am I up for it? You know? And then just to have all of the wind sucked out of her day 1, it was really sad to see. So I obviously had to address that with both children. And she came around and did her own thing. But I tell you, she hasn't touched a YouTube video since that day. So she's been doing
Wow.
other things. I know.
I
I
mean,
know.
that story alone speaks 1,000 words.
I know.
And you
So
think, I mean, I could go on so many tangents, but think about a 30-year-old woman who was criticized when she was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old.
yeah.
And now she doesn't exercise. And then when she does exercise she takes the leap to go to a gym and then gets a criticism. And then of course she's going to be emotional, and it takes her back to her 8-year-old self. You know what I mean? Like, you're just, obviously that's not what you mean by Sophie saying that, but it's just like, you can see there's an emotional connection to physical fitness in
Yes.
such a just like raw moment.
Yeah. Her physical performance is always something that I feel like she has had a lack of self-confidence in. And she was born with bilateral clubbed feet, and she's too young to remember any of the treatment that went on. But she was basically casted from the hips down starting at 10 days old. It was a wild
Wow.
time. And then put in like a boots and bar situation until about age 5. So she might have some distant memory of it, but a lot of that happened before she can really even put words to it. But the point is, the way that me and Joey saw her, our lens was
Yeah.
then tinted a certain way. And I think a lot of us, we were like, ooh, should we push her physically? You know, she's a little bit smaller. Are her feet okay? You know, we were nervous. And then seeing that play out in how my oldest daughter, who's trying to be like, you know, trying to be helpful, but like, she was like, you're not doing that right. And part of it is like Ruthie, she doesn't have the flexibility. Like, she can't just do a regular squat with her heels on the ground right now.
Yeah.
That's something
Because
we're
her ankles
working
are,
on because
especially
they're
work
just
on your
too tight.
mobility.
Yeah. And so it's like, Sophie's not wrong, but being able to speak to both of them in that moment and letting them know, like, hey, one, know your place. You know, older kids always try to parent their younger siblings, and that gets annoying. But two, Ruthie also needs to work on, hey, we can overcome this. You can recognize that kind of crushed your spirit a little bit, but like, you're still on day 1. We got to get this done. And she did. She did a different activity. But I think that would even be something to pick back up on, maybe after or later on in the challenge, and be like, do you want to try that YouTube video again? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Ray wanted to do her own, which is hilarious. She's 4 and she quit on day 1. And I was like, normally I would be the parent who would be like, no, like, we're going to do it. We're going to crush it. But I was like, you know, she has so much intrinsic motivation already. I think she's just 4 in her. she's just not ready for it. And so I didn't feel threatened in that moment of like, oh no, like, is she a fraud? No, I didn't care. But I think it's funny that she was like, I don't think I want to do this, and just quit. And then even throughout the weeks, she still wanted to do certain elements of it. So she came to me today, for example, and said, I know I'm not doing my race 10 hard, but can I still practice some handwriting? And I was like, yes, absolutely you can. Because that was going to be one of her things. And I printed her off some handwriting. And so she at least has context for what it might look like to have some self-discipline throughout her day in various categories. So yeah, that's how the girls are doing it. I think one thing I've noticed with Ray specifically, being that young kind of preschool age kid, is that like man, exercise is their default. Like movement is their
Mhm.
default. My 4-year-old cannot just sit there and binge TV. She gets restless. Like
Mhm.
she'll watch a good show, and or if she's sick, she might sit there for a whole movie, but she loves being up on her feet and climbing and moving and riding a bike and
Yes.
swimming. And it's amazing how I was trying to think about it, like, man, if kids, like, when do they start to lose that? When do they
Mhm.
start to lose that movement as their default? And I was like, I bet it's around school age
I was
when we,
just it's school. Yeah, it's
yeah,
fine.
when we put them in school. And so I
Yes,
was like, I think this is a societal conditioning
absolutely.
that we've lost some of this natural. And then I said it's such a bummer because then us as adults
Mhm.
have to be so intentional about our movement, because otherwise we are just,
Mhm.
sitting at the desk or
Totally.
sitting on the couch doing whatever. And it's crazy to kind of witness that, what it could have been of like just such a natural integration of your
Mhm.
day. I was telling Joey this morning, I was like, farm kids are a great example. They're up moving all
Yes.
the time, like,
Yes.
but us in the suburbs, we got to find our own ways to get there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure you know this quote, but it's like kids don't bounce off walls if you don't give them walls.
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
It's like kids are meant to be outside, and you see that in other cultures. Like kids are around the world are all playing soccer, doing cartwheels, they're doing it all. Of course, that's why kids love recess. Like it will always be
Yeah.
the best. So it just makes sense. But I completely agree. And I love that you brought up that her default is exercise. So I do think from a professional standpoint that it's like, why even give her the structure? Just like let her live in that freedom. Don't we wish, like you kind of said it, don't we wish
Mm-hmm.
as adults that we would just have the freedom to move and be active and like not have it be this like nothing against 75 hard, you know what I mean? But it's like
Yeah.
now as adults, we're like, I need to check the box. Whereas she's just like, I'm going to go skip around the block or something. And it's like, wow, that feels free.
Yeah.
Like, I wish I could just feel free enough to do that, which is hopefully what I'm advocating for, in my
Mm-hmm.
groups and just in life and everything. It's just like, go out, go hike, go walk, enjoy God's creation.
Yeah.
So I agree. And I think it's really smart that you recognize that in her. And you're like, I don't need to put structure to this. Like, this is her default. We're just going to make this fun. And I think that points to a lot of the kind of benchmarks. I had a lot of people commenting on Instagram. I put up a question box about just like, what are some benchmarks for ages of kids? Everyone wants to know, what age can kids start formally exercising? So I do think that's important to go over. So I'll quickly run through them and then we can kind of put them to good use when we talk about your girls.
Yeah.
But in general, I always say there's a difference between age and biological age and training age. I always think there's a good distinction there. Biological age is obviously the age you are based on your birthday. Training age is how many years you've been training, how many years have you been exercising. And that's important because that shows coordination, that will show the coach or whoever you're working with, that will show your ability to know where your body is in space. Simple things like cross motor patterns, being able to pick up your left arm and your right foot, different things like that. You'd be surprised. Jumping, for example, a lot of adults cannot jump if they've never exercised before. So there's like these little things that you have to kind of pick up on. An example would be like, if I'm almost 30 years old, but I have been strength training since I was 7. So my training age is 23 years. 23 years, right? Whereas somebody who is also my age, 30 years old, and just walks in for the first time to a CrossFit gym, their training age is 0. You obviously want to approach those two individuals very differently. And that's smart to know with kids. So I'll start off with biological age, and then I might have some caveats based on training age. But in general, a child 0 to 3 years old needs to work on primitive movement patterns, crawling, walking, rolling, grasping, sighting an object and picking up the object, moving towards the object, holding objects, all of these primitive movements, which most moms, if you're a crunchy mom, you're probably taking your kids to a chiropractor, and the holistic chiropractor is probably already checking on those things. Being able to move opposite arm, opposite leg, army crawling on the ground. Those are some basic benchmarks for kids and for babies. ages 4 to 8, which is where your girls are kind of sitting in, the main pillar is that it needs to be fun. It needs to be fun and it needs to be unstructured, meaning that we're working on jumping. We're jumping rope. We're doing jumping jacks. We're playing games. We're throwing a ball and catching the ball. We are hopping from side to side and hopping forward to back. We're running and picking up a ball and running back. We are, jump rope, bands, hula hooping, right? Playing basketball, going to swim lessons. We're doing gymnastics. We're doing karate. We're doing rock climbing. We can do all of these very physical activities without just doing city league soccer that we know all parents hate anyways.
So true. My kids have never been on an organized
Yeah.
sports team. I can talk about why. But.
Yeah. So I don't think those sports teams are bad inherently. I'm not, right? Like I played soccer, I played t-ball, right? Like I did all the things. I understand. But things like going to the park and getting your kids on monkey bars and jungle gyms and like learning how to bear crawl on the ground and roll in the grass, like that is so stinking important. You would not believe how strong kids are inherently. Kids can hold themselves up on a pull-up bar for an extremely long time, and you ask an average adult to do that and they're not even close. They can't even hold themselves up on a bar, let alone do a push-up or a pull-up or anything like that, right? So we need to really cultivate that in our kids ages 4 to 8. Now, ages 8 to 12, I would still consider this generally prepubescent still, 8 to 12, right? 8 to 12 is if they have established those motor patterns of fun and knowing where their body is in space, plyometrics, body awareness, climbing from that 4 to 8 age range, then they can absolutely start adding external load from ages 8 to 12. Now, I know people are going to ask for my sources, and I can literally quote these out of my Essentials for Strength Training and Conditioning, my main textbook that all of my certifications, my national certifications are from, and I will literally read it because I have typed it out so people don't think I'm bogus, is that from ages 8 to 12, no, it is an absolute myth. It is a myth that strength training with external load will inhibit their growth plates. That is a complete myth. Myth.
Wow.
But what needs to happen is that from ages 8 to 12, form is always the priority. Form is always a priority. So let's just use an example. Let's say a prepubescent 10-year-old girl wants to work out with her mom. She can do an age-appropriate version, maybe mom's back squatting, maybe 10-year-old daughter is air squatting or goblet squatting with a dumbbell or a kettlebell. The reps need to be an appropriate amount of reps, so like 8 to 12 reps, but the priority needs to be the form, not the load. Because when children start, they start with just body weight, rock climbing, bear crawling, rolling, things like that. That's all body weight movement. That's kind of like an open-minded way. And then once we go to structured and we start weighting that up, we need to reinforce those movement patterns because they do not have the circulating hormones because they're prepubescent. They do not have boys, they do not have testosterone, nor do girls. They do not have insulin-like growth factors. They do not have growth hormone. They do not have these puberty-like hormones circulating in them for muscle growth. So their improvement comes from increased neural patterns. So knowing what that movement is like, brain to muscle, that's what we're grooving. That's what we're creating at that time. Another thing, I'll actually read, I'm just going to read this here. Okay, I'm actually going to read 2 quotes from here. This is from the American College of Sports Medicine. But contrary to the traditional belief that strength training is dangerous for children or that it could lead to growth plate disturbances, the ACSM contends that strength training can be safe and effective activity for this age group, provided that the programs are properly designed and competently supervised. So what this means is that it's a professional, ideally has a certification from the NSCA, the ACE, the NASM, or a lot of these bigger body organizations. What this doesn't mean is that we're taking these young kids, loading them up, and then putting them in like a middle school weight room with a PE teacher and hoping for the best. And I don't dog on that, just to be like facetious. I just mean like that in public school, that's realistically what's happening. So I just think as parents, we need to kind of take that responsibility back, especially in exercise, to teach those movement patterns, at the house if you can, because obviously, hopefully you're training. And so hopefully your kids can see you train and they're hopping in with that. Okay. Yeah. So that's age 12. Form is a priority, but they can use external load. From ages 12 to 15, this is where boys and girls split, because boys now have circulating testosterone and they will gain a ton of muscle mass from ages 12 to 15. Therefore, if they have been training and they have an appropriate training age, they have created all of those movement patterns. You've slightly loaded them as a young boy, and now they're entering high school. They're ages 13, 14, 15. Yes, they will react and recover from high intensity, high power output strength training. Facts. Girls, on the other hand, because they do not have circulating testosterone, they will continue to improve, but still through new neuro patterns, not from increased muscle mass. So what that means is that with boys at that age, it's important to load them if the movement pattern is correct with more external load. But for girls, it's more important to work on agility and plyometrics and running and deceleration. All of those same ideas that we had on some of those younger ages, it's even more important now as a teen girl. Also because teen girls will mature earlier, meaning that they will be fairly fully developed women at this time. And if they're in formalized sports, that means that their hips are wider, meaning that they are adjusting to major skeletal differences. They have really big changes. A lot of center of gravity changes are happening. So you almost have to have a reboot with these girls that are going through puberty, because an 8-year-old girl who's looks like an 8-year-old boy, they look exactly the same physiologically, right? You can train them the same, but a 12-year-old girl that has a little bit more mass up top and a little bit more mass on her hips, her center of gravity is going to change and you're going to have to train that. 15 and on, absolutely, you can, I would say you can load up girls earlier, like if they have those movement patterns down. But 15 and on, every single individual can be strength training. Every single individual, as long as those training ages have been matched. So let's say a child comes from a household where the parents didn't exercise and now they're entering freshman football. Their training age is 0. So what I'm saying is you can't just take a 14-year-old boy and load him up and hope for the best. He has not created those motor patterns. His brain doesn't even know what it's doing. Jokingly and not jokingly. You know what I mean? Like, you have to start from the beginning. So I'm going to take it back to you, Liz. That 4 to 8 age range your girls are living in. So I talked about how it's fun, and you went jumping, and you went, jumping jacks, you went rock climbing, and you went kind of these like unstructured activities. Sounds like you're already doing that. So do you want to dive into that a little bit more of how you're incorporating that?
Yeah, I was taking notes the whole time.
Love it.
Writing it down. I think the 0 to 3 part is so fascinating, because I think, again, with my middle, she was so restricted physically from that 0 to 3 point, like literally in boots and bar. And I think that has had implications going forward. And it frustrates me, but I know it was necessary. So
Mhm.
it's interesting too, watching my third child, who's now 4, she seemed to progress through those primitive movements very quickly. I mean, girlfriend was holding a plank at like 4 months old,
Mhm.
up on knees, wanting to rock as if she was ready to crawl at 4.5, 5 months old. I mean, she was just flying through these milestones. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I have now 2 different babies with like in my, while as Ruthie didn't walk till she was 18, 19 months
Mhm.
of age. And so just I think even with people with really little kids, not that you need to panic about milestones, but they're telling us something. I think if we can listen to that and we actually have ways to inform maybe what's going on, it can help, because I see now my 4-year-old
Mhm.
is very, very developmentally, like physically just in tuned with her body, and girlfriend can swim in the entire length of a swimming pool, and she's 4. You know,
Mhm.
she learned how to ride a 2-wheeler bike this summer, and she's 4. So she's learning all these things alongside my 8-year-old. And so it's just interesting. I know you glossed over that primitive part, but I think that tells us as
Mhm.
parents maybe what we're setting them up for, and then there might be some room for intervention there. The 4 to 8 stage fun being the pivotal factor, I think that's such a good reminder. And again, like, I wasn't like stressed about Ray quitting on day 1, because yeah, I recognized she was kind of just naturally already doing some of these things. Now, I do think the part that's most interesting is that conversations with Sophia have been like, am I getting stronger? Do I see more muscle mass? Like, what's going on there? And I've had to kind of explain, because I've heard you say before, like, you're actually just training your brain right now. And
Mhm.
then, like, in the future, you can worry about putting on muscle mass, because yeah, you look the same as if you never strength trained. And I don't think we talked about it earlier, but aside from training for the 10K, she has for the last, ever since I did 75 hard, so nearly a year, she has strength trained at least 2-3 times a week pretty consistently, and she's loving that. And we bought her weights for her like Christmas and birthdays,
Mhm.
and form is something we talk about often. She will ask me, is this right? And I'll adjust her a little bit here and there. And we talk about which, like, the different type of, like, well, you're hinging from your hips here, but then in this is a squat, so it's a little different. So she's getting that, and the program she's using is doing a good job of explaining it too. So I feel like we are trying to hit on that, like, train your brain, get yourself discipline part of it locked in. And then yeah, when you get older, as your body continues to mature, then you can
Mhm.
worry about, like, am I putting muscle on? And then yeah, with our 8-year-old, um I feel like we're in that spot right now where I'm like, I have this window where I can continue to, like, really work on your flexibility, but I also, like, I want you to build confidence. And I think one of the ways they do that is through physical conquering of something. So we put our kids in swim lessons. We committed to, like, over a year of swim lessons. And part of that was because we have a pool. And so I want my kids to be very water safe. But the other part of it was like, well, she wasn't in gymnastics. We didn't do any sports. My girls do ski in the winter. They've skied every year since they were each 5. And I think Ray's going to start skiing this year at 4 years old. And that's a great winter sport. And I mean, they're good at it. Like, Sophie was doing black diamonds at like age 6 or 7. And Ruthie has been doing blues and greens since she was 5 or 6. So um, I kind of joke, because people are like, are your kids in sports? And I'm like, we do family sports.
I
Like,
love it.
we do swim lessons and skiing.
Mhm.
We don't, they're not on a soccer team. I've asked them. They don't want to. They don't
Yeah.
have an interest in it.
Yeah.
But I think the cool thing about that is that a lot of what they're learning about moving your body intentionally is from watching me and Joey do it. So if they
Mhm.
were in just organized sports and I was just coming to sit on the sidelines and I didn't have my own workout routine or fitness journey, they would never make that connection. They would be like,
Yeah, they
oh,
would have
okay,
no idea.
no idea. And I tell the girls too, kind of, I don't know if this is rude or not, but to me it's a big deal to be able to, like, see your parents, like, really taking care of themselves. And I said, I never once saw my mom work out. Like, I just never did. That wasn't her
Mhm.
reality. And I was like, it's a really big deal that like I feel like I'm like breaking this generational line of like
Mhm.
women in my family who haven't pursued fitness,
Mhm.
and I want to be different, you know? And so I'm like, you know what I never did? I never saw my mom work out. So like it's pretty cool that you've seen your mom now work out in all these different seasons, and now you're joining me in it.
Yeah.
And they, you know, they always roll their eyes. Oh, I get it, mom, you know. Like we think you're great, but um I do think that's one cool thing of like you could totally claim like you're in family sports, and
I
that can
love
be,
it.
that's totally fine. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up a great point. Skiing, I water skied growing up. I think I learned how to water ski when I was like 4 or 5. Do you know how much coordination that takes,
Yeah.
right? Like to be able to reinforce all those things. Another thing is like, if your parents into an activity that has some physical exertion to it, like hunting, take the kids hunting. You know what I mean? That's hiking.
Yeah.
Taking them to a local park. Swim lessons are great, and I think just using the resources you already have available without having to like purchase, a big package of karate lessons or dance or something expensive. There's so many things out there. And like you said, even with like YouTube, there's so many like dance videos for kids, and they have to make those connections. Even if the instructor was like, "Hey, your right hand, move your right hand up and down." Like that really does make like such a big difference for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I just love like hearing about your family sports. I think it's great. I love it so much. The other thing I wanted to hit on was I heard this quote one time, and I have seen you post about it a little bit on your Instagram, is that like daughters, I'm going to try and get it right. The younger generation, so like daughters, nieces, will will view their bodies in light or in the viewpoint of how their moms talked about their own bodies.
Mm.
So I think it's so cool. Even if your girls right now think it's like cheesy, that mom's doing all these things and she's really intentional about it. The reality is like they're learning how to speak about other people and about themselves based on how you are speaking about other people and about yourselves. And that seems like a no-brainer, right? But how often is it that like we'll hear the older generation being like, "Oh, still haven't lost these 10 pounds," or "I'm just going to have a salad tonight," or "Well, I got to walk this off." Like that really starts to accumulate. So I'd be curious, like how you are managing that, like how you're using those words with your daughters.
Mm. Yeah, this one's huge. So I had a pretty debilitating eating disorder as a teenager. It started out as like just restricting calories, and then it was over exercising. I remember at one point I was like tracking each calorie, and I would like maybe eat 1200, and then I'd like be on the elliptical until I burned all 1200 at night. And I was literally in the 8th grade or 7th or 8th grade when this was happening. Young. And I look at my oldest daughter who's beyond that age. I'm like, wow, I was younger than you when I started these horrid behaviors. And it eventually turned into full on bulimia. So when I think about, oh my goodness, raising 3 daughters in diet culture today, like that has such a heaviness to me. But I feel like I have a special lens because I remember how my brain was processing everything. And it wasn't that I was just so obsessed with looking a certain way. There are other things folded into how we feel about our bodies and our physical being and how we show up in the world. So, my number one thing that I kind of, in processing that in my own life, was what was the gap that allowed that sort of stronghold to take place in my life for 7, 8 years and eventually led me to like full on rehab. For me, it was identity. I had a lack of identity, and I needed to find something that I could say, this is me. And it sounds really weird, but an eating disorder did that for me. I was like, this is me. I can restrict my caloric intake. I can do these things. I can force my body to do this thing. And so when I think about my girls and how they view themselves and their body image, it's not just, okay, let's learn about food and fitness. For me, my number one thing is, who are you? What is your identity? Because I don't want that to be a foothold for Satan, frankly, but for
Mhm.
anything to kind of take root in them, because that was a huge gaping hole in my life. So that was the just from my own kind of like psychoanalyzing my past. That's kind of what I've seen as like the biggest thing, is fulfilling that, teaching them who they are and whose they are first. And then from that place, and you said this so beautifully on our show, if it's like you have intrinsic value as a daughter of God, from that place, let's honor that. Like, what a
Mhm.
gift. Let's honor that by eating good food, by moving our bodies. And amazing that we get to have fun through that process too. Like my parents have a lake house, the kids can go skiing and wakeboarding and tubing all they want, right? But we get to do those things
Mhm.
because we are physically capable. And so that's where I started. But then just everyday stuff, my kids will never hear me say, "Oh, I need to lose 5 or 10 pounds." They just won't hear me say it. Now, I definitely think it's not that I would ever be afraid to comment on my body, because I don't feel that way. Like, I'm going to be postpartum soon, and I'm going to feel a certain way probably.
Mhm.
But it's never in a like I have shame, or I am um disrespecting myself.
Mhm.
I think you can be real about, oh man, I need to rebuild some strength. I am not feeling my best right now. I physically am feeling really tired because I just came off a vacation. I ate a lot of stuff I don't normally eat. There's different ways we can be realistic and
Mhm.
comment on how we're feeling
Mhm.
that aren't just like this weird kind of body shame. And they get that from other people. I think you're right.
Mhm.
The older generation, the aunts, uncles, the grandparents
The
even. The
grandmas need to
grandmas.
shut their mouths.
Oh, we can't lose this last 10,
Yep,
15
I
pounds. I'm
know.
like, okay. No, I
Yeah.
totally get it. I hear it. I hear it all the time. And so just talking to them about that, of like, hey, I don't want you to deny how your body is feeling. I
Mhm.
actually want you to be very clued into how your body is
Mhm.
feeling. So if you're not feeling great, I want you to be able to put language to that. That's not just like, I feel fat or I feel bloated. Let's get more sophisticated in how we're
Mhm.
talking about it. Now, for my three girls, I'll be really honest, none of them struggle with a poor body composition. They all are very naturally lean girls. And I've thought about like, okay, what would happen if we entered a season where I felt like
Mhm.
their body composition was not progressing in a way that I felt like
Mhm.
was healthy or biological for them? How would I have that conversation?
Mhm.
Because I look around at today's youth and there are a lot of kids
Yeah.
who are under muscled and over fat or over, I don't even know what it, maybe just it's water weight or
Yeah.
it's supersensual.
Overindulgent on many. Yeah.
Yeah, like I meant like, yeah, muscle to fat ratio, right? And
Yes.
so that is off for them. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't want you to just say that my body is healthy in every state, because then we get into that kind of
Yeah.
era. But for having three lean girls right now, I think one, it is because they move really well and they eat really well. But I also think that we should be okay having those conversations in the future, or even through times of sickness. Like, let's talk
Mhm.
about what your body is doing right now. It is healing
Mhm.
itself. Your body wants to do this.
Mhm.
It wants to go through this process. Um, and so those are just ways that I uh, growing up in the 90s with the ultra like heroin chic thin body as the ideal. Luckily, that's not what they're facing currently,
Mhm.
but I do still think there's room for them to have a distorted view of their own body and beauty based on what society's telling them.
Of course.
Obviously, that's always going to be a thing. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah. Of course, and I hear the exact parallel when I hear you talking about the food conversation. And you've
Yeah.
talked about this so eloquently on your podcast of just like it's not just about talking to your girls about protein, carbs, and fats. Like it's not that, because that can easily, with those flippant comments, turn into a spiral of, orthorexia or something, where we're just caught up in the healthy food. Like that's not what it's about. It's about entering in those intentional conversations with your kids where you're like, hey, we know this food isn't great for us. You know what will make us probably feel really great because God designed us to move is if we live within God's design and we go and move. God made us moving, dynamic individuals. Let's go live within that and let's go flourish in that. We may not feel super great at the beginning, but I can trust based on God's design for humanity that it will probably work itself out. And I'm glad you kind of touched on that, because that was another major question that a lot of moms had for me, which is like, when we're having this realization that the food industry is out to make us all like obese and sick, it's that they're realizing that they probably will have to play a little, backtrack with their kids because maybe their kids aren't the healthiest. And that means an intentional conversation maybe around exercise or body composition. And that obviously needs to be age appropriate, not full of shame, not full of guilt. Like you said, reiterating the value that we intrinsically have, but we should feel our best so that we can live the biggest and baddest, most fulfilling life so we can love more and serve others more, right? So that's a really hard conversation. And like I said, it should be age appropriate, but addressing those conversations with your kids with humility and coming alongside them as you, as the parent, being the example, I think can go have major waves. Something from a clinical perspective that I wanted to hop in on that particular note was that a lot of times parents will see their children that are not the healthiest. I'm just going to use obese. They see their obese children and they're thinking, I'm going to make my kid run around the block. It's like, okay, well, you can't even run around the block. You're going to make your 8-year-old run around the block, try to lose weight? Like that seems like a terrible idea. Okay. Something that's interesting is because we know that strength training does increase muscle mass, even if we don't have those growth hormone, insulin like growth factors, or testosterone circulating, we will still have muscle being challenged. They're going to have to overcome a force. They will become more insulin sensitive. They will gain muscle. They will use their food more efficiently. So a really, crucial thing to note is if you like strength training as an adult, that is something that's so helpful to teach your kids if they are overweight, because it can be way more stinking fun than making your kid run around the block, which they're already probably going to connect to shame and guilt anyways. Whereas if you just incorporate a really age appropriate strength training, I don't even want to say program because that sounds really structured, but just rhythm maybe in their life, that can really help with some of the maybe the overweight that they're the obesity that they're dealing with. Maybe overindulging on food, maybe that coupling with changing the food that you're preparing for your family, that can have a really big impact on a child's body composition, rather than just trying to guilt trip your kid into like going to swim lessons 7 times a week in hopes that they become healthier. Kids will read through that line. They will understand why you're doing it. That's it's so apparent. But if you come alongside your kid and say like, hey, we're going to work on this together. Let's get strong together. That seems way more cool, way more fun, I think, with kids than just, again, guilt tripping them into running around the block, which, again, ain't nobody gonna like that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, one of the things I wanted to really make clear in our conversation tonight too, it's something I've been thinking about a lot, is like, I as a parent can't expect my kids to model anything I'm not already doing. And I think that if I wasn't already on a real food journey or a fitness journey, I can't expect my child to be on that journey too
Mhm.
without me. Not saying they can't have other influences in their life, but if I want to be their main influence, then I better be doing those things. And
Mhm.
so this even means like from the spouse perspective too. Joey and I have mentioned before, like, can you imagine the confusion in our household if mom all day long was like, we're going to eat healthy, we're going to eat healthy, we're going to eat healthy. And then dad was coming home with like all of this other food and just completely, because he's an adult, chose his own way and didn't partake in the family's sort of like nutritive value system.
Mhm.
That would be really confusing. Same way when Joey was really into fitness and I wasn't doing anything. Really confusing. Oh, does dad only need to work out, or is like that, is that not a thing that mom needs to do? And so it should be, it comes very naturally when you are pursuing your own health and wellness journey to then bring that kid into it too, because I do get really bummed out when I see kids who look really metabolically unhealthy. And I'm like, you're so young.
Yeah.
You're so young. How can we make up for some of this time where you
Hmm.
should be in peak performance right now? And there's so many factors that play into that. But just if that's youth, maybe it's one of those like, how can I, yeah, join them in that journey, but also like,
Hmm.
how am I modeling that? Am I modeling
Hmm.
really poor choices, or am I modeling a pursuit of wellness?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this ties into my next point of something that's really important with kids is teaching them like general gym and weight room etiquette. And that seems so silly, but think about like if you're like a 30-year-old woman, you're not really into exercise and you walk into a CrossFit gym and there's terms written on the whiteboard and you're doing exercises that you don't even know what you're doing. You don't even know how to hold a kettlebell. You don't know where you should walk, if you should walk around. You don't know any etiquette. You don't know terms, you don't know verbiage. It makes you so uncomfortable. And so, what I think, that I can just praise my parents for is I was so young. And I think, like I said, I started strength training at 7, but it's because my dad brought me into the weight room, taught me what a barbell was, dumbbells, how I load the bar, how I strip the bar, you walk around somebody's platform and you don't stand in front of somebody if they're lifting because, you don't want to get them off their focus. These are small, basic things that I built so much confidence in as a young girl. And did it spur me on to be a strength coach now? Absolutely. But I just think about like when I was, 12 and then I'm in my middle school weight room, I already knew what I was doing. Boom, boom, boom. I felt confident in my class. Granted, I really like sports, so maybe that's what was my motivation was, but I just felt very natural in it. And so teaching kids weight room or gym etiquette, one is a safety issue first, but also parents can absolutely teach their kids how to hold a dumbbell, how to hold a barbell, how to, okay, well, for this exercise, let's make sure like, let's go outside, we're not going to drop this on the ground. And like, those are some basic things that, as silly as it sounds and as rudimentary as it sounds, really does build confidence in a child that may end up going to public or private school that has PE class and they have to play badminton or they have to play dodgeball, like that's going to give them so much confidence
Mm,
going into that.
yeah, so true.
Another like clinical thing I really wanted to hit on because a couple people asked was like, what are the sets and reps that we should be encouraging our kids to do? So during those kind of formative years, ages for sure, like 8 to 12, it's because we're focusing on form, it's really important to give them sets and repetitions. So like 3 sets of 10 so that we can see all of the reps rather than, hey, we're going to have a timer and do 1 minute
Mm,
because one, it's not giving them like a volume aspect to it. Granted, some kids will will themselves to do 100 reps within that minute and another kid will do 1. So you're not really giving them an appropriate range for, like positive outcomes. But also when you give them a time hack rather than sets and reps, the form, they're going to be so focused on getting a certain number of repetitions in as a challenge rather than focusing on every single rep individually. So where that kind of comes into play is, I know I keep dogging on CrossFit, but it's just because I feel like it's the most popular thing right now. So I keep going back to it. But, performance gyms, for example, like if your kid is really into baseball and he's going to like a Velocity baseball training academy or something, they will probably have strength coaches there that will give them 3 sets of 12 and they will watch them. But if you put your kid in a general like class that's held at a CrossFit gym, there will probably be a CrossFit coach that's doing a CrossFit styled workout that's going to be a 12-minute quote unquote AMRAP, as many rounds and reps as possible. And I'm not saying that that coach isn't focusing on form, but I think it would be more age appropriate if they did a classic strength training protocol of just, hey, this exercise, here's an example. Let's do it body weight first. Okay, Johnny, you can grab a 5. Kelly, you can grab a 12. and we're going to do 3 sets of 10, and I want you to touch your butt to the box. See how that's like so much more structured for them to work on and focus on than just like this kind of hodgepodge circuit of just moving from like one exercise to the next and doing like an ambiguous or arbitrary number of repetitions. So I love that kids are doing the YouTube videos. But I think as a parent, if you want to take it a next step, one, focus on the form, and two, let's say, hey, why don't we do 8 reps this round rather than doing 27 reps that all look like garbage? Yeah.
That's great. That's good input.
Okay, and also I realized earlier in this podcast, I said I had 2 quotes, but I only read one. So, let me just read the other one just for the sake of making my brain feel a little bit better. Kind of going back to creating those motor patterns. The quote is from my textbook, and it says, an important factor related to the expression of muscular strength in children is the development of the nervous system. If myelination of nerve fibers, motor neurons, is absent or incomplete, fast reactions and skilled movements cannot be successfully performed, and high levels of strength and power are impossible, meaning that you have to create the pattern first, the understanding of where your body and brain is in space, before you can add a strength component to it, or you can add a power component to it, meaning you're not only moving something from A to B, but you're moving something from A to B quickly. That's what power is, right? So, good example, if you have like young kids, right? You have to create basically a body weight version of that movement first before you can demand A to B. So, like, let's just take a squat, for example. They should air squat first, then move weight from A to B. Then maybe they can move weight from A to B, a squat, touching their butt and coming up quickly, or maybe adding a jump or a plyometric to it, right? So those are kind of like the basic step-by-step processes of like advancing kids when it comes to strength training specifically. Let's see. Younger kids. Okay, let me double check any other last questions I had here.
I wonder for you, I have a question.
Yes.
When, let's say that Sophie wants to do a super hard workout and push herself. So here's a great example. She did a run earlier this week, and I think she forgot it was like trash day, and so she was like, didn't want to run on her street when the guys were picking up the trash, which I understand. And so she came in, and then it kind of threw her off, and so she ended up, she said, I only did 2 miles, but I wanted to do 3. I think I might run on Friday because I'm not feeling good about my run. And I was like, okay, yeah, I understand that. The first question I asked her on Monday when we had this conversation was, well, did you set a goal? Like, what did you actually want to run? Well, it was kind of loose. I thought maybe 2, maybe 3 miles. So I thought, well, since your target wasn't clearly identified, you left it up for interpretation. Then once you got into it, you felt like you quit earlier than maybe you could have, but you also were thrown off on it.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that, but like, I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. How these conversations of like, recognize when you failed, yes. But when it's not necessarily a failure and it's like, I want to push myself harder, what resonated with you as a kid if you wanted to set a goal and had that conversation, but you didn't, as the parent, you don't want to be like, oh, you need to have like this punishment mindset of like, yeah, you didn't do a good run, so you need to start over and run again. But I
Yeah.
want to encourage her, if she's listening to how she felt about that run and she's being honest, like, yeah, it wasn't my best, then why should I stand in her way and be like, no,
Exactly.
it's fine, honey, sweetie. So like, how,
Mm-hmm.
from your perspective, being in fitness so long as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
because I never cared a hoot until I was like 25,
Uh-huh.
my training age is young. I'm so young. So yeah, any tips for like how I could better facilitate that
Yeah.
conversation?
That's a That's a great question. It's a great question. I think especially for kids who are either like entering puberty or after puberty and they like can really judge that for themselves. And Sophie is so intuitive. And I can tell that by the way that she like cooks and takes initiative and like does all, you know what I mean? Like she's just like so mature for her age. My goodness. Um,
Hilarious. Yeah.
I would just say let her take that lead. And if she is recognizing areas in her life that she wants to like improve and she's not filled with that shame or guilt, because I think as a parent, if you're recognizing shame or guilt attached to it, that's where the parent needs to come in and offer truth to the
Mm-hmm.
scenario, reaffirm the value, and then pivot the outcome. So it's like if she was showing guilt or that type of connection to her quote unquote failure of that run, then it's like, okay, I think as a parent, you can take the initiative to be like, no, no, no. Like some days we have great days, some days, we have bad days, but like it's not bad because, you didn't finish it. It's just like you didn't meet your goal, but that's okay. But like because she didn't express shame or guilt in that, I think parents should absolutely push their children or facilitate that high drive motivation with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Some kids, will be completely adverse to it. And if you see that in them, then don't instill shame or guilt, that's for sure. But if you see that those kids are highly motivated, highly driven, have a really high, like, emotional IQ on certain scenarios, absolutely. I think you need to be pushing them for sure. I remember at a young age in my teen years, I was running in really big track meets. And I remember to this day, I remember which races I did really great at, which races I did not my best at. And I remember those conversations I had with my parents. I remember expressing, I wasn't, my head wasn't in it in this race. And I remember my dad coming to me and being like, okay, well, why are you just going through the motions? Do we need to readdress this? Is the training too hard? And I think just having that parent step into that conversation and offer um, more maturity and more truth to the scenario can really help, especially
Mm-hmm.
a teen girl for
Mm-hmm.
sure in that scenario. But I don't think parents should ever hinder their kids physically in that regard. Like I remember being like, I don't know, 9 years old. And I remember a light bulb went off in my brain. And I was like, I can run. Wow, the freedom I have with running. And I remember my dad was mowing the lawn and I was outside and I was kind of like running like back and forth on the grass. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I remember going inside being like, Mom, I'm going on a run. I'm going to run down the canal, which is like, 2 miles or something. And I was like so young. And I remember my mom being like, great, go for it. Have at it. Have at it. Fun. But my dad secretly followed me in the car, you know,
Love it.
because he was like, of course, like Kelsee needs to go build that confidence. Kelsee wants to go run. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Nothing inherently wrong. But I remember, puttering out a mile down the road and seeing my dad's car parked on the side of the road. And I was like, my dad was following me. And what did he do? He picked me up. He picked me up and drove me home because I was like, I'm tired. But at the same time, my parents encouraged that in me. And I
Mm-hmm.
know some kids are more sports motivated than others, and that's okay. But I just think, you know, as an adult, I'd ask, not necessarily you specifically, but as an adult, like in a non shame or guilt way, don't we all kind of wish that our parents were like encouraging us to be more active? Like that's
Yeah.
not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know if you like see that in Sophie, but like I think that's great. I think her like thinking about it and being like, okay, well, if you want to try again on Friday, try it again on Friday. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Totally.
that's kind of the approach I took because I didn't sense that it was like it's not like she was pushing the food around her plate and then was like deciding to like, oh, I'm not gonna eat something as a result of not
Yeah.
exercising, or I'm not gonna like I'm always in tune. I'm always looking for
Yeah.
yeah,
Always looking for
little
the red
tricks,
flags.
little red flags that I would have done in my teenhood. And so I didn't get a whiff of that. It was
hmm
truthfully I just don't know, like it just felt off and it wasn't my
Yeah.
best performance. And you know what? I'm like, the sooner you can recognize and have those days and know you're okay, wow, that's going to save you a lot of like therapy in your 20s. Like,
Yeah.
that's good. So, okay, but that is helpful to be
Mhm.
able to put labels of like, check the boxes, make sure that's not shame and guilt driven.
Yeah.
But beyond that, don't be afraid to push your kids physically, because they're listening to something inherently in them and they're
Yeah.
figuring out that own motivational voice that frankly a lot of us are still trying to learn.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
love that.
Exactly. Totally, totally. Um, I know I get this question all the time, and I think it kind of ties into like with the food and the exercise thing is like, is it okay to give protein powder to kids,
Mm.
especially if they start exercising more? And I think my general rule of thumb is like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not like they're not going to digest it. Protein powder inherently is fine for kids. But I think once you're, in those formative years before puberty, obviously you're trying to teach your kids some basics with food. So you know, teaching everything that you are teaching to your audience of just like, hey, let's make the food from home. Let's learn about our ingredients. Let's learn why this is the best way for us. But I will say, if you have, let's say, a teen boy who has strength training in the morning and then he's starving all day, can't get enough food in, like he's just ravenous, his metabolism is huge, he's gaining a ton of muscle mass, he's maturing, and you can tell he's growing facial hair, you know what I mean? He's like literally maturing. And then he has football practice in the afternoon. Absolutely give that kid some protein powder. And
Yeah.
obviously at that point, like, you're trying to encourage the most muscle mass as possible naturally, right? So I do think, if you, or even girls too, I don't think it's inherently bad for teen girls at all. I was drinking protein powder in high school, but I just had such a high, exercise output at that point that, of course, you're just trying to supplement that recovery for your kids, especially kids like, again, that have like maybe morning weights all day in class, then they're going to practice, and then maybe they're going to games or something like that. Of course, I think protein powder is totally fine. Um, I'm assuming, I mean, do you guys use protein powder? I'm curious.
Joey uses it more regularly than I do. I go in and out. Um, when let's see, we'll make protein shakes often, and some of our girls would be like, "Ooh, can I have some of that?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure."
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think Sophie has ever come in from a run or a workout and made herself a protein shake. What she does do, and what I've kind of trained her to do, is in the morning before she runs, I was like, "Girl, please don't run fasted. Like, drink some milk." And she's like,
Yeah.
"Okay." So she'll drink a glass of milk, or she'll eat like half an apple or something. She'll get some
Perfect.
quick carb in. She'll go for her little run. She'll hydrate throughout her run.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll tell her to make sure she refuels after. But I don't think she's ever asked for protein powder. But we give it to our younger girls, and they love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's fine. Um, I did get a question on Instagram. Is soccer 3 times a week for an hour good enough, or do they need more? Um, Again, kind
What
of going back.
age?
No age indicated on the question. Um, this is kind of like multifaceted in my answer, but I think we've already kind of like hit all of them. Um, Obviously, we should always be like encouraging our kids to exercise. If they really love soccer, put them in soccer. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Um, I think if your kids love a sport that has a high aerobic capacity to it, I don't think that's wrong. But I do think a lot of times, maybe in more formalized sports, because the coaches are sports coaches or they're just parents who are volunteering to be the coach, they have probably zero formalized background, I would say. Maybe they have a background in their own sports history, but no formalized background, meaning what's the easiest thing to do for kids is just like to make them run, right? So, as a parent, if we're all about taking back the responsibility on teaching our kids a lot of things, that's, I think, where you just at home, it's like, okay, well, when you're doing your warm up and you're doing your dynamic stretches and you're doing, your squats and your pushes and your pulls and things, it's great to teach your kids too. I don't think we need to necessarily, um, ignore the strength training. I think having your kids in swim lessons, like you said, or skiing, awesome, great. Teaching coordination. If you want them to strength train, though, you're probably going to have to be a little more intentional about it.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Liz, thanks for your time.
Oh my gosh, this was so good. I took ample notes and I'm going to be making sure that I'm implementing all these things. So thank you for it's
Woo!
I always learn so much when I sit across from you. I love it.
Liz, can you quickly talk to us about the real food framework?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So we launched a new resource. It's really a brand new concept completely. So I have children's nutrition curriculum and I have meal plans, but this is like my food philosophy. And I've never released anything like this, so I was like very nervous to kind of
Yeah.
get it into the world. But the framework, when I was like, okay, how would I summarize my approach to food? Because people are always like, give me a list of foods to eat or not to eat, or how do I know what's actually healthy? And it's like, ah, those brands are always going to be changing their ingredients. Those, your location, your budget, your family values, your growing a family or your family stage is always going to be changing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't give you a list of what to do, and I'm not in a place to do that. I don't want to do that. But if I could impart how the last 10 years of my life have gone, that would be really helpful. So I developed this framework really just by boiling down, like, how do I look at food? And I figured out there were four really key pillars. I'm like, well, I take a historical approach to food. I look at what would have been available to me, minus the industrial food system. So what's geographically around me, what makes sense for my lineage, my heritage, what makes sense for what I have access to, and what makes sense for understanding how the food system might have botched a particular ingredient, right? Milk is a great example, or wheat, or sugars, or GMO additives, any of those things. So take a historical approach to food. That's how I view food. I want to ask questions about, like, how did my ancestors like interact with this food, if at all, or what would have been the traditional means of consuming this? Because there's some wisdom there that we are
Absolutely.
very much lacking. So pillar number one. Pillar number two was like, okay, but I live in a modern world. So how do I mitigate toxins that are in my food and water supply? And I'm not talking about just reading ingredients, although that there's a piece of that in there. But I'm also talking about the things that don't show up on the ingredient list,
Mm-hmm.
right? The agrochemicals, the hormones in your animal products, things like that. How do I mitigate that? And then from there, it's like, okay, I have the intellectual piece of it, but how do I get the most bang for my buck? So the third pillar is leveraging your ingredients in your kitchen, especially right now with every ingredient being so asking so much more of our dollar.
Oh
I
yeah.
want to leverage. I want to leverage those. Okay, I want to leverage. Joey and I were
Mm-hmm.
just having a conversation about like how much money I spent on yogurt this week, and I was like, but it's worth it because if you look at the protein, it's worth. You know, leveraging your
Exactly.
ingredients. And then from there, optimize your family kitchen. This is meal planning, shopping, sourcing, being realistic about meal composition, how you should be approaching
Mm-hmm.
these things if you want to fuel your family. And so yeah, that was it. That's the framework, and it's written all in a book, and it's kind of all, it's like pretty and cute, and I got photos done for it, but it's just it was like me sitting down
I love it.
typing as if we were like getting coffee, like, this is what's worked in my home. I hope it works for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it.
Amazing. I know you've been working on it for probably a while.
A long time.
A long time, but I love it. I think the name is catchy. I think it does boil down, what you believe, and I think that's actually so helpful for the average consumer because, for me personally, I think when people ask me how I eat, whatever, right? It's like, well, I'm generally working back towards like the 11 pillars of the Weston A. Price Foundation, and I think
Mm-hmm.
most of us in like real food, ancestral eating, living, however you want to, whatever umbrella you want to put us under. I think most of us will point back to the Weston A. Price Foundation, but it's like, okay, a lot of those are culturally driven. So how am I going to implement that in my daily life? So I love that you made it even simpler and you gave a lot of detail to each of those. And I think people want to see more back end of creators who have a lot to say and have a lot of like personal investment in their online platform. Like you have showed your family in all these different scenarios. And I remember, I think the first time I ever found you was about sourdough. And you, Liz Haselmayer, taught me how to make sourdough through your highlights. I watched those highlights 10,000 times to make sure that I knew what I was doing. You did your sourdough guide, you did your raw dairy guide. So I just think people love that. People love that kind of stuff because you're giving your real life input, and giving real guidance to people when it comes to food. And I always appreciate a source that acknowledges a traditional view of food, because I think we've talked about this 10,000 times, but like, the food system itself and also academics surrounding food and dietetics
Yeah.
makes things a little bit more confusing. So I just love that you put your time and effort and made the book. Love it.
Yeah, we like taught a class like over a year ago, and then after I ran like 20 women through this class, I was like, that was the most exhausting thing I've ever done because
Yeah.
each session was an hour and a half of content.
Whew, yeah.
And from there, I was like, maybe I should put this into a book. So it's been
Mhm.
over a year of this
Yeah.
framework, but it's really the last 8 to 10 years of my life. And I
Mhm.
think that that's the piece I love the most. I love the like nerdy stuff too. I think that's cool, but a lot of that also is always changing.
Yeah.
Laws are always changing,
Mhm.
perspectives are always changing, science is always changing. But for me, it's like the confidence of the person who is in charge of nourishing their home, I want that to just increase. I want them to have no anxiety about how they feed their family and no anxiety about like, oh, I know I should be buying this best product, but I can't afford it. So then what do? I want to
Mhm.
give you the calm to that
Mhm.
chaos because I totally understand what that's like. And
Mhm.
it sucks to be in that situation. And you want to
Mhm.
have knowledge as power to work through those seasons. And I've been there. I'm yeah, in there right now with a lot of things. So
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah, I love sharing a piece of my heart
I love it.
through the books.
Congrats on your launch of it. It's beautiful.
Thank
I
you.
think it's phenomenal. So happy for you guys. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing so much tonight. But just like how you're encountering exercise with your kids. I appreciate you just like sharing and being here tonight. So keep on getting after it, girl.
Yeah, I will. I'm excited. Exercise in the third trimester is so fun. So we're
Like,
partying.
probably limited jumping, lots of power walking,
Yeah.
maybe some seated exercises.
Yep. Lots of that. Lots of that.
Good. Well, I just love that you're doing it. So I think it's great.
Yeah. Thanks for all your work. Like I said, I learn every time I sit across from you. I just love being in your presence. So
Love it.
thank you.
Well, you're so kind. All right. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good. See ya.
Bye.